He boarded the yacht in jeans and flannel. By sunset, they were laughing at him like he didn't belong. But Keanu Reeves stayed silent until a storm hit, and everything changed. By dawn, the crew was whispering a secret that would leave the guests in shock. Why was Keanu really invited? And who set him up? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The coastal air of Big Sur drifted gently through the open window, carrying the scent of pine, salt, and damp earth. Keanu Reeves sat at his worn wooden table, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, the ocean humming in the distance. He hadn't touched his phone in 2 days. The last film wrapped a week ago, and the silence here had become his therapy. No red carpets, no flashing cameras, just morning light and the quiet hush of waves against cliffside stone. The knock on the door was soft, but in this stillness it might as well have been thunder. He looked up slowly, the mug paused mid-air. Another knock, this time followed by a familiar voice. "It's just me," said Alana, his longtime manager. "Didn't mean to break the spell." He opened the door to find her holding a flat, rectangular envelope, unlike anything he'd seen. It shimmered in the light, gold trim, hand-lettered calligraphy, no return address. It looked more like something delivered to a royal estate than to a cabin halfway up the California coastline. "What's that?" he asked, stepping aside so she could enter. "Honestly? I'm not sure," Alana replied, handing it to him carefully. "It came to my office this morning. No courier, no email, just this. Addressed to you. Thought you'd want to open it yourself." Keanu examined it closely. The paper was thick, almost fabric-like. His name was written in a hand so elegant it looked printed, except it wasn't. He could see the delicate variation in the ink flow. Whoever sent this had taken their time. He slipped a finger beneath the seal and opened the envelope with care. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, its texture soft under his fingertips. The message was brief, but every word seemed crafted with intention. "Mr. Reeves, you are cordially invited to join an exclusive gathering of visionaries, creators, and changemakers aboard the private vessel Celestial Pearl for a weekend at sea. This event is by invitation only, and your presence has been personally requested by the host, Mr. Sebastian Vellum. Departure, Friday, 6:00 p.m., Marina Cove, San. All accommodations and travel arrangements have been secured for your comfort. We believe this weekend will offer insight, connection, and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Respectfully, the Celestial Circle." Keanu read it twice, then again. "Sebastian Vellum?" he murmured. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Alana sat on the edge of the couch and shook her head. "Only vaguely. He's reclusive, but supposedly a philanthropist of some kind. Big art donor. Some say tech money, others say old wealth." Keanu looked back down at the invitation. The design was breathtaking, minimal, but deliberate. This wasn't a press stunt. It didn't feel like Hollywood. And yet, it felt off. "I've got a weird feeling," he said quietly. Alana gave him a look. "That's what makes it interesting." Keanu set the invitation down on the table and leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the cliffs beyond the window. The ocean shimmered in the late morning light, endless and unknowable. The kind of beauty that made him feel small in the best way. But something about the envelope still sat uneasily in his chest. "You think it's real?" he asked. Alana nodded. "I had it checked. It's real. The marina is booked under Vellum's name. A yacht called Celestial Pearl is docked there now, 400 feet long, multiple decks, fully staffed. No media coverage, no leaks. Whatever this is, it's private. High-level private." Keanu sighed through his nose. "So what's the angle?" "That's what I don't know," Alana said. "It's probably nothing. Some eccentric billionaire who wants to be around interesting people. You fit the bill. He gave a faint smile, not convinced. I'm not exactly a party centerpiece. Alana chuckled. Exactly. That's what makes you different from the usual names on these lists. You show up, be your quiet, thoughtful self, and everyone feels smarter for having talked to you. Keanu looked at the invitation again, then at her. Would you go? Alana shrugged. If I were you, maybe. You've been hiding in this cabin for 3 months. Might be good to interact with the world again. Just for a weekend. He took another sip of coffee. It had gone lukewarm. He wasn't the type to jump at social invitations, especially ones with mystery behind them. But there was a part of him, a quiet, aching part, that wanted to feel useful again. That wanted to be around people with ideas, even if only to listen. And there was something else. This didn't feel accidental. It felt timed. Keanu stood up and grabbed a pen and notepad from the kitchen drawer. If I go, I'm not playing dress-up, he said, scribbling down a small list. Alana laughed. Didn't think you would. What are you packing? Wool socks and flannel? He nodded. Flannel, jeans, hiking boots, toothbrush, maybe a book. Alana shook her head fondly. You're going to show up looking like a hermit philosopher. I kind of love that. I don't want to impress anyone. If they expect tuxedos, they invited the wrong person. That's exactly why they probably invited you. Keanu looked at the envelope once more before folding it gently and tucking it into a journal. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like he'd want to keep it. I'll go, he said quietly. But only to listen, not to prove anything. Alana smiled. That's the Keanu I know. I'll have your travel sorted by this afternoon. As she left, the wind picked up along the cliffs, and Keanu looked out at the sea again, feeling a tension he couldn't name rising in the tide. Friday came faster than expected. By late afternoon, Keanu stood at the edge of San Diego's Marina Cove, watching the sunlight scatter across the rippling water. A sleek black SUV had brought him from the airport to the dock. His entire luggage consisted of one weathered duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a paper bag tucked under his arm. The yacht towered above the other vessels like a floating palace. Celestial Pearl, the name shimmered in silver script across the hull. It looked more like a small cruise ship than a personal boat. Glass-paneled balconies, cascading decks, and golden accents caught the light like it had been built to outshine the sea itself. Keanu let out a slow breath and stepped forward. A sharply dressed crew member spotted him and approached with practiced grace. Mr. Reeves? Keanu nodded. Welcome aboard, Celestial Pearl. I'm Nathan, Chief of Guest Services. May I take your bag? He handed it over and walked up the golden gangway in silence. Each step felt like crossing into another world. On deck, music played softly through hidden speakers. The other guests were already mingling, men in tailored suits, women in cocktail dresses that sparkled in the sun. Conversations floated around him in clipped, affluent tones, hedge fund jargon, gallery names, international deals. And then, the shift. People turned. A woman in a silver dress looked at Keanu's flannel shirt and hiking boots and whispered something to her companion. The man smirked, then raised his glass in mock salute. Keanu offered a quiet nod and kept walking. Nathan guided him to a polished lounge area, where a tall man in a crisp white suit stood alone, gazing out at the ocean. Mr. Vellum, Nathan said. Mr. Reeves has arrived. Sebastian Vellum turned with a wide smile, hand extended. He was in his 50s, lean, with salt and pepper hair combed back so precisely it could have been sculpted. His voice was smooth, controlled. Keanu, it's an honor. I'm glad you came. Keanu shook his hand. The grip was firm, but the eyes behind the smile didn't blink. Thanks for the invitation, Keanu said. This place is a masterpiece. Sebastian laughed softly. I try to make the setting worthy of the company. Keanu nodded once. Please enjoy yourself, Sebastian added, gesturing toward the mingling crowd. Dinner will be served on the upper deck in an hour. The weekend promises some very enlightening conversations." Keanu gave a small smile. "I'll do my best to listen." As Sebastian turned to greet another guest, Keanu stepped away, heading toward the far side of the deck. He found a quiet corner, leaned on the railing, and stared out to sea. Behind him, he could still feel the stares. They weren't admiring, they weren't curious. They were calculating, and somewhere in his chest, the unease deepened, not loud, not sharp, but slow, like a fuse no one noticed had been lit. Keanu stood at the edge of the marina, staring up at the yacht as the late sun began to paint golden streaks across the water. Even though he had already seen it once, the celestial pearl still took his breath away. It gleamed like it had been carved from moonlight and ambition. Towering decks, seamless railings, glass corridors that shimmered as if floating in mid-air. It was too perfect to feel real. He shifted his duffel bag over his shoulder, fingers brushing the frayed canvas strap. No cameras, no press. Just him, the sea, and a floating mansion, filled with people who likely already knew he didn't belong. A bell rang softly from above as the crew began final boarding preparations. A young man in a sharp uniform approached, with a clipboard and an earpiece tucked behind his ear. He glanced up from his list, paused, and blinked. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu nodded, offering a polite smile. "Of course. Welcome aboard." The staffer's eyes briefly scanned Keanu's flannel shirt, old boots, and sun-faded jeans. There was a moment, barely a flicker, before the smile returned. "We're honored to have you, sir." Keanu offered his duffel, but the man waved it off. "One of our porters will take that to your cabin. May I escort you up?" Keanu followed him toward the gleaming golden gangway. The closer he got, the more polished the world became. Even the stairs looked too pristine to walk on without gloves. As he stepped aboard, conversation seemed to pause. Only for a moment, but long enough to notice. The clink of wine glasses softened. A woman in pearls tilted her head, taking him in with a kind of smile that wasn't warm. It was amused. Her companion leaned in and whispered something, and both of them laughed too quickly to pretend it was kind. Keanu kept walking. The main deck was lavish in every sense. White leather seating curved along the railings. Sculpted fountains flowed into sleek pools that shimmered beneath glass floors. Guests moved in clusters, each one more expensively dressed than the last. Diamond necklaces, tailored suits, gold cufflinks, watches that cost more than most homes. And then there was Keanu, standing quietly in the middle of it all, wearing hiking boots and carrying the weight of calm he didn't need to explain. The staffer led him to a lounge area where Sebastian Vellum stood, framed by the sunset like a man rehearsed for it. Dressed in cream linen with a martini in hand, he greeted Keanu with arms slightly open. "Keanu," Sebastian said, as though they were old friends reunited. "What an honor!" Keanu extended a hand. "Thanks for having me." Sebastian's handshake was firm, but his eyes calculated. Behind the charm, there was something too measured. His smile lasted half a second too long. "You made quite the entrance," Sebastian added. "Refreshing to see someone show up as they are." Keanu gave a small nod. "Didn't know there was a dress code." Sebastian chuckled. "With you, there never needs to be." Sebastian motioned toward the main deck. "We'll be casting off in a few minutes. Feel free to mingle. Dinner is at 7. You'll find some of the most powerful minds in the world up here tonight." Keanu smiled politely, though he had no intention of competing for attention. He turned away and began walking along the side rail, letting the noise behind him soften into a distant hum. The yacht began its slow pull away from the marina, the engine so smooth they were barely audible. As the coastline drifted farther into the background, Keanu found a quiet spot near the stern where he could watch the horizon without interruption. The wind had picked up slightly. He leaned into it, hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning the sea. The water was a soft gray mule, calm but endless. Out here it felt like time paused. Everything human faded into something simpler. Behind him, conversations carried on. The cadence of arrogance floated across the deck. That startup's worth $2 billion now, but I told him to hold out. I only fly private. Can't risk the germs. My art dealer in Paris swears the Basquiat is authentic. Keanu stayed where he was. Eventually, a waiter approached and gently offered a flute of champagne. Keanu accepted it, nodded his thanks, and took a sip. It was smooth, expensive, perfect, and completely forgettable. He noticed movement behind him. A man in a red blazer was walking in his direction, with a drink in hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if I join you?" the man asked. Keanu nodded once. "I'm Victor Penley. I run several private equity firms. I think we have a mutual acquaintance. Director from one of your films. Loved your work, by the way." "Thanks," Keanu said simply. Victor paused, then looked Keanu up and down. "Didn't pack for the theme, huh?" Keanu gave a half smile. "I didn't realize there was one." Victor chuckled. "Fair enough. You got your own thing going, that's respectable." But his eyes lingered too long, like he was waiting for something else. Keanu didn't offer it. "Well," Victor said, patting him on the arm before walking off, "if you change your mind, we're gathering by the grand piano later. A few of us are pitching moonshot ideas. Thought you might be into that sort of thing." Keanu nodded again, but he didn't turn around. He waited until Victor's footsteps disappeared. Then he let out a long breath. There was something strange about this gathering. It wasn't just the wealth or the excess, it was the atmosphere, too perfect, too smooth, like a stage built to impress rather than connect. He sipped the champagne again, but it still didn't taste like anything. The coastline behind them faded into dusk, and Keanu realized what had been bothering him since he arrived. Everyone here was performing, and he didn't know what role he was expected to play. As twilight settled in, the lights on the celestial pearl shifted from warm gold to a softer, cooler tone, casting a silver glow across the deck. A soft jazz ensemble played somewhere inside the main lounge. The mood turned more intimate, but the edge in the air remained. Keanu wandered quietly, passing clusters of guests standing near sculptures and glass-paneled lounges. The way they spoke was performative. Their laughter came too easily, too loudly. The smiles stayed just a second too long. He watched two men shake hands while simultaneously scanning the room behind each other's shoulders. He wasn't used to rooms like this anymore. Rooms that measured value in net worth, not soul. "Is that really him?" he heard a woman murmur behind him. "I thought he was taller," another voice whispered. He stepped into the main salon, where crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, and walls of glass offered a panoramic view of the sea. Keanu moved toward the back, away from the center of attention. A tray of hors d'oeuvres passed by, and he took one out of politeness. A delicate bite of smoked salmon and something that tasted like it belonged in a painting, not a meal. "Mr. Reeves," came a voice from his left. Keanu turned. A woman in a high-slit, emerald gown approached, her diamond earrings catching the light with each graceful step. "I'm Victoria Holt," she said. "Fashion world. I design clothes for people who pretend they don't need them." Keanu smiled softly. "Nice to meet you." "I have to say," Victoria continued, "your look tonight is brave." He raised an eyebrow. "Brave?" She gestured to his flannel shirt and scuffed boots with a kind of amused elegance. "Most people would be terrified to show up here without a tailor involved." Keanu chuckled once, gently. "I just came to listen." "Interesting," she said, sipping from her glass. "Most people come here to be seen." She drifted away before he could respond. No goodbye, no real connection. Just a hit-and-run observation that left the taste of subtle disdain behind. Keanu finished his drink and returned the empty glass to a tray. He walked slowly to the upper deck, where the sky had deepened into navy blue. Stars were beginning to pierce through. As he leaned against the railing, he realized he hadn't had a single real conversation since boarding. Every word exchanged had been layered in performance. compliments that didn't mean anything, questions that were statements in disguise. The sea moved beneath them in steady rhythm. Keanu stared into the dark, open water, his hands curled around the rail. He felt it now, deeper than before. This wasn't a weekend getaway. It was something else entirely. The yacht glided forward into the unknown, and the further they sailed, the more he felt it. Not a storm coming. Not yet, but something worse. He was surrounded by people, and yet he had never felt more alone. Dinner was announced with a soft chime and the scent of truffle oil rising into the air. Keanu followed the crowd toward the grand dining room, a cathedral of glass and light nestled in the center of the yacht. The room shimmered with golden fixtures and ivory linen. The centerpiece was a long polished table set for 40, with crystal goblets already gleaming beneath a ceiling of starlight panels. As guests filed in, staff guided each to their designated seat. Keanu waited for his turn. A woman in a gold dress was ushered to a seat near Sebastian Vellum at the head of the table. A famous venture capitalist followed, then a media mogul. One by one, names were called, and the seats closest to the host filled quickly. Finally, a young crew member looked at Keanu and gave a small nod. "Mr. Reeves, this way." He was led to the farthest end of the table, at the corner, separated from the inner circle by name cards, crystal towers, and the quiet weight of status. He sat without complaint. Across from him sat an older man with slick-back hair and a self-satisfied grin. A lapel pin glinted on his jacket. He barely acknowledged Keanu's presence before turning to his left to whisper to a woman with red lipstick and the posture of someone used to being obeyed. As the first course was served, a tiny portion of something involving oysters and foam, Keanu listened. He didn't mean to. The voices were loud enough not to ignore. "Didn't know mountain men were on the guest list," the man across from him said, glancing in Keanu's direction. The woman laughed. "Maybe he's the new deckhand." Another man 2 seats down chimed in. "I thought we were supposed to be elevating the room, not time traveling back to the grunge era." Keanu looked at them for just a moment, offered a quiet smile, then returned his gaze to the food he didn't feel like eating. Their chuckles were sharp, a performance for each other. Soon the conversation turned. "Remember that meme of him sitting on the bench with a sandwich?" the red-lipped woman said. "They called it Sad Keanu. Went viral for being depressingly adorable." The older man laughed again. "Right? That was peak charity case energy. You'd think a man with his paychecks could afford a smile." Keanu didn't respond. He cut into the oyster carefully, placed it in his mouth, and chewed with slow, deliberate calm. He had been through worse. Years of rejection, tragedy, and loss had taught him how to sit through moments like this without letting the poison reach his heart. But it still stung, not because it was personal, but because it was empty. These people had everything the world told them to chase: wealth, beauty, influence, and still they needed to tear someone down just to fill the silence between courses. The next dish arrived, a delicate stack of vegetables arranged like art. Keanu stared at it, hunger nowhere to be found. The conversations grew louder with each glass of wine poured. Keanu stayed quiet, keeping his eyes on the table, listening not because he wanted to, but because their voices carried whether he liked it or not. A woman 2 seats down leaned over to a group of men and said, "I actually used to like him in those old action movies. What were they called again? Fast something?" One of the men corrected her. "Speed. But I mean, come on, that was like 25 years ago. He's still riding that?" Another guest added, "Wasn't he in some sad samurai thing, or the dog movie?" "John Wick," someone said. "The guy gets mad about a puppy and kills everyone. That's the plot, right?" They all laughed. Keanu took a sip of water and let the silence settle around him like a shield. He wasn't going to explain himself. He wasn't going to defend his work. His films had spoken to people in ways these guests would never understand. They hadn't grown up with pain as a teacher. They hadn't needed stories to survive the nights. Still, their words hit harder than he expected. The man across from him, now several drinks in, lifted his glass and gestured toward Keanu's end of the table. "To unexpected guests," he said loudly, slurring slightly, "and the bravery it takes to wear flannel in a room like this." There were scattered laughs. Keanu gave a soft nod, acknowledging the toast like it was just another part of the evening. A waiter approached and quietly placed the main course before him, a small portion of seared duck over parsnip puree. As the server leaned closer, he spoke in a whisper only Keanu could hear. "Hang in there, sir. Not everyone here agrees with them." Keanu glanced up. The waiter didn't linger. He moved down the row with the same practiced grace, serving dish after dish like nothing had happened. Those quiet words stayed with him. He pushed the food around his plate, barely tasting it. The wine in front of him remained untouched. By dessert, the atmosphere had shifted from elegance to entitlement. Laughter grew louder, but the joy felt forced. People clinked glasses with performative glee, making loud declarations about their latest ventures, their exclusive properties, their private islands. Keanu looked around and saw not a single real connection. Just postures, just roles. And for the first time all evening, he felt something unexpected. Pity. Not for himself. For them. They had no idea what they were missing. No understanding of how small they looked, trying to feel big. He set down his fork, folded his napkin slowly, and stood. No one noticed, not right away. He left the dining room as quietly as he had entered, making his way back to the outer deck where the wind still carried the truth better than any mouth inside. Outside, the night had deepened. The sky stretched overhead in a dome of dark velvet, pierced by stars that didn't need to be impressive, they just were. The wind was colder now, crisp with sea salt. Keanu stood near the edge of the upper deck, hands in his pockets, watching the water slice quietly beneath the hull. Behind him, the laughter continued faintly. Distant, but sharp enough to cut if he let it. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and tried to settle the knot in his chest. He didn't feel angry. He felt hollow. Not because of what they said. He'd heard worse, been through worse, but the absence of kindness, the absence of even a flicker of curiosity or respect, that had weight. These people didn't know him, didn't want to, and still they'd spoken like they did, like he was a symbol, not a person, a prop in their private show of superiority. He heard footsteps behind him, soft but purposeful. Expecting another comment or smug observation, he turned, ready to give a polite nod and walk away. But it was the same waiter from earlier. The young man stepped beside him, holding a tray of untouched champagne flutes, but his eyes were fixed on the ocean. "You don't have to say anything," Keanu said quietly. The waiter glanced over. "I know, but I just wanted to." Keanu looked at him fully now. "I grew up watching your movies with my dad," the waiter said, "especially the ones where you weren't a superhero, just a guy trying to do the right thing. Those meant the most." Keanu nodded, his throat tight. "I just wanted you to know," the young man added. "Some of us see past the surface." Keanu gave a soft smile. "Thanks for telling me." The waiter nodded once, then disappeared back into the glow of the dining hall. Keanu turned back toward the ocean, but the words stayed with him. Some of us see past the surface. That was all he needed. Not approval, not applause. Just one reminder that he wasn't crazy for choosing kindness over attention. He stayed out there for a while longer, letting the sea do what it always did, carry things away. By the time he returned to his cabin, the halls were quiet. The party had moved elsewhere, or maybe died down. He closed the door behind him, sat on the edge of the bed, and untied his boots. In the stillness, his heart ached. Not for himself, but for how much joy these people must be missing. He looked out the small window at the vast black sky, then turned off the light. He didn't need to be seen. He just needed to remember who he was. The next morning arrived with sunshine and orchestral music flowing through the yacht's intercom system. Keanu rose early, dressed in the same quiet clothes he always did, and walked to the deck alone. The sea was calm, the sky was clear, but the silence felt prepared, like something rehearsed. At breakfast, Sebastian Vellum stood at the center of the deck like a conductor awaiting applause. He clinked a spoon against his glass and smiled as guests gathered around, many still nursing the afterglow of too much wine and too little sleep. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sebastian announced, his voice smooth and bright, "welcome to what I like to call the Ascension Game." A polite wave of interest moved through the crowd. "It's a tradition among my circle," he continued. "A weekend-long challenge for the mind and spirit. A test of leadership, vision, and problem-solving. No prizes of gold, just the rarest gift of all. More guests clapped now, some leaning in, others already smiling in anticipation. Sebastian went on. "Over the next 2 days, you'll face several tasks: teamwork, innovation, communication, and yes, competition." Keanu stood near the back, quiet, watching. Sebastian raised his glass. "Those who rise to the top by Monday morning will have earned more than admiration. They'll have earned legacy." More applause. Then Sebastian added with a grin, "And to keep things interesting, each of you will be randomly assigned to a team." An assistant stepped forward with a silver bowl filled with cards. One by one, names were called and guests were grouped. Each time someone was paired with a friend or close contact, they let out small cheers or fist bumps. When Keanu's name was drawn, a hush fell. He was placed with 3 others: Victor Penley, the hedge fund executive from the night before, a social media brand strategist named Haley, and a tech investor named Jordan, who seemed to run on espresso and ego. Victor chuckled as he looked at the card. "Lucky me." Haley barely looked up from her phone. Jordan gave Keanu a once-over. "Wow, that should be inspiring." The teams were given their first task: construct a basic business solution using only the limited tools on the yacht. Each group was sent to a different location. Keanu's team was led into a lounge stocked with charts, supplies, a whiteboard, and a timer already ticking. Victor leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "We'll handle strategy. Keanu, you can write it all down." Keanu looked up slowly. "I think we should start with the problem first." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "It's a theoretical prompt. Just fill in the blanks and make it sound impressive." "We could design something that actually solves it," Keanu said calmly. Haley finally spoke. "Okay, Zen Master, how about you sit back and channel that inner monk while the rest of us get to work?" Keanu blinked, then nodded. This wasn't a game. It was an ambush dressed in luxury. And it was just beginning. The timer ticked down as the team worked around him. Or rather, worked around avoiding him. Victor and Jordan stood over the whiteboard sketching out jargon-filled charts that sounded complex, but said little. Haley tapped away on her tablet, adding buzzwords to a shared doc she refused to let anyone else read. When Keanu offered a quiet suggestion, an actual solution to the logistics problem in their prompt, they nodded but ignored him entirely. He tried again. "What if we simplified it? Less marketing speak, more real-world impact." Jordan rolled his eyes. "This isn't a charity bake sale." Victor added, "No offense, Keanu, but your resume doesn't exactly scream business strategist." Keanu didn't flinch. "I've spent 30 years working with teams under pressure. Vision matters. Execution matters more." Victor smirked. "And yet here you are, taking advice from people younger than your last action movie." Haley didn't even look up. "Let's stick to the pitch. If we lose, it won't be because we didn't listen to the guy in hiking boots." Keanu leaned back, the muscles in his jaw tight but still. He wasn't going to argue. He wasn't here to win anything. But the pattern was becoming clear. The challenge wasn't about ideas, it was about hierarchy, and he was being placed at the bottom. By the time the teams reconvened on the main deck, Keanu's group had slapped together a glossy presentation full of vague slogans and stylized charts. He stood at the edge while Victor delivered the pitch, barely acknowledging Keanu's presence. When Sebastian stepped forward to give feedback, his praise went only to Victor and Jordan, and to our very own Mr. Reeves. Sebastian added with a smirk, "Thank you for your meditative silence." Polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. Keanu nodded once, saying nothing. The second challenge came after lunch, an outdoor obstacle designed to simulate decision-making under pressure. But just before the event began, the rules were changed. 2 teams were merged into one, and Keanu's leadership was suddenly assigned by Sebastian. "You'll lead this round," the host declared. "Let's see how the soft-spoken warrior handles pressure." The guests cheered. Keanu turned to the team, trying to lay out a quick plan, but from the first moment no one followed his instructions. Jordan walked off to do his own version of the task. Haley rolled her eyes and said, "I'll just follow the loudest voice." Victor smiled coldly and said, "Lead the way, boss." When Keanu tried to redirect them, they talked over him, laughed. One even accused him of being passive-aggressive when he calmly repeated the instructions. They didn't want to succeed. They wanted him to fail. When the task ended in chaos, Sebastian clapped once and said, "Well, that was enlightening." Keanu stood in the center of the deck, surrounded by smirks, applause, and judgment dressed as curiosity. He felt every eye watching him, not as a man, but as a mirror they hoped to crack. Night fell, heavy and quiet. The stars above the celestial pearl blinked with quiet indifference, their beauty lost on those too busy calculating their next move. The deck had emptied after dinner. Most guests retreated to the lounge, where another round of cocktails and laughter filled the air with artificial warmth. Keanu stood alone at the bow, his silhouette outlined against the ocean's endless black. The sea stretched around him in all directions, deep and unknowable. Out here, there was no sound but the wind and the occasional creak of the ship's frame. He leaned on the railing, his hands rough against the polished brass. The games had only just begun, but the message was already clear. He wasn't here to win. He was here to be watched, provoked, judged. Not because of anything he'd done, but because his presence disrupted their order. They couldn't understand why someone like him didn't fight back, why he didn't argue, retaliate, or lash out. His stillness confused them. And in their confusion, they tried to shame him into becoming smaller. He took a breath, slow and steady. He didn't mind being underestimated, but the cruelty, carefully veiled beneath compliments and rules designed to break him, that was harder to carry. He stared out at the stars and whispered to himself, almost too quietly to hear, "Maybe I don't belong anywhere anymore." The words surprised even him, not because they were untrue, but because they felt too familiar, too rehearsed by a life that had carved him open in quiet, personal ways. The people he'd lost, the solitude he'd chosen, the kindness he'd tried to live by, even when no one noticed. He didn't want attention. He wanted peace. And on this ship, among these polished strangers who laughed behind wine glasses and measured their worth by who they could belittle, peace was the last thing available. Still, he stayed. Not because he had anything to prove, but because walking away too soon would let them believe they were right. That silence meant weakness. That gentleness meant failure. A soft shuffle echoed behind him. He turned, half expecting another insult dressed as small talk. But it was the same waiter again, holding a folded wool blanket. "Figured it might be cold out here," he said, offering it without a word more. Keanu took it with a nod, draping it over his shoulders. The man hesitated, then added, "Some of us see what they don't." Keanu met his eyes. It wasn't a lot, but in that moment, It was enough. He turned back to the sea and let the silence hold him, wrapping itself around the ache in his chest like a tide reclaiming a forgotten shore. He hadn't come here to play games, but something inside him whispered he was already in the middle of one. And the real storm wasn't coming from the sky. It was already aboard. The yacht was silent. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the thick, restless kind that keeps you awake with thoughts you can't outrun. Keanu had tried to sleep. He'd pulled the blanket tighter, stared at the ceiling, closed his eyes over and over again. But the words from the day echoed too loudly. The empty praise, the private jabs, the way leadership had been turned into spectacle. Sometime after midnight, he gave up. He pulled on his flannel, slipped on his boots, and stepped out into the dim hallway. The corridor lights were low, casting soft golden glows along the floor. The yacht creaked softly as it cut through the dark water, steady but alone in the vastness. He wandered without purpose, letting his feet guide him down the narrow back stairwell. The upper decks were all polished glass and soft music. But here, below the surface, the air felt different. Warmer, grounded, real. Eventually, he reached a small, swinging door labeled galley. He paused. Behind it, he heard faint movement, a low hum. Not conversation, just someone doing what needed to be done. He hesitated, then gently pushed it open. Inside, the kitchen glowed under soft yellow lights. It wasn't like the guest areas. The walls were brushed steel, the counters filled with stacked trays and organized tools. A woman stood at the far end, tying her apron tighter as she pulled a loaf of something warm and sweet-smelling from the oven. She looked up, startled for a moment, then relaxed. "You're not supposed to be down here," she said, not unkindly. "I know," Keanu replied. "I couldn't sleep." She studied him, wiping her hands on a cloth, then nodded toward a small wooden stool by the corner prep table. "Sit, but if anyone asks, you're helping me peel mangoes." Keanu smiled faintly and took the seat. The woman returned to slicing the warm loaf. The smell of banana, cinnamon, and butter filled the air like a lullaby. "I'm Rosa," she said after a moment. "Head chef, though you wouldn't know it by the size of this kitchen." "Keanu." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "Well, Keanu, you look like someone who needs tea and banana bread." "I won't argue," he said. She poured water into a kettle and set it on the stove, then cut 2 slices of the bread and placed them on a chipped ceramic plate. As they sat in quiet, the kettle began to whistle. Rosa poured the tea, chamomile with honey, and pushed the mug gently toward him. They didn't speak for a few minutes. Keanu took a sip, then another bite. The warmth settled in his chest. The quiet kindness of the moment felt like medicine. Rosa finally broke the silence. "You look like someone carrying too much." Keanu glanced down. "Maybe." "Well," she said, her voice soft but certain, "you don't have to tonight." Rosa leaned her elbows on the counter and took a sip from her own mug. She didn't ask him why he was there. She didn't ask him about movies or cameras or fame. She just sat with him, like 2 people who knew the weight of long nights. "My father used to make banana bread when I was little," she said. "He'd sneak chocolate chips into it and call it magic loaf. We thought it really was magic, the way it could fix a bad day." Keanu smiled gently. "Sounds like a good man." "Health is," she said. "Still alive, but sick. Cancer, liver. It's been a long road." "I'm sorry." Rosa nodded. "Thank you. I work here because the pay is steady, and I can wire money home every week. Most people think a yacht like this is glamorous, but for the crew it's just work. Hard work." Keanu listened carefully. There was something in her voice that reminded him of people he'd known years ago. His mother, Kim, others who fought battles with grace and didn't need the world to see them doing it. "Do you like it?" he asked. Rosa thought for a moment. "I like feeding people. I like knowing that something warm and simple can make someone feel human again. That part I love." She paused. "The rest, the show, the glitter, the guests who won't look you in the eye. It's noise." Keanu nodded slowly. "There's a lot of noise up there." Rosa smiled faintly. "You came down here to get away from it." He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I think I came down here to remember something." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He took another sip of tea. "That kindness doesn't need an audience." Rosa's eyes softened. "No, it doesn't. The best kind never does." For a long moment, the kitchen was still again. The hum of the refrigerator, the gentle creak of the yacht. The two of them sitting in shared silence. No demands. No expectations. Finally, Rosa looked at him again. "I don't know who you really are," she said, "but I can see this much. You're tired, not just in your eyes, in your spirit." Keanu let out a soft breath, as if the truth of that had been pressing against his ribs all day. She reached across the counter and gently tapped the side of his mug. "Sometimes the best hearts are the quiet ones," she said. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just nodded, eyes stinging, and let the warmth of her words sink in deeper than the tea. Rosa stood up, wiped her hands again, and began clearing the counter. "There's more banana bread if you wake up hungry." "Thank you," Keanu whispered. She gave him a kind smile. "Get some sleep, Keanu. The world will still be loud tomorrow." He stood, nodded once more, and left the galley in silence. But for the first time in days, his chest felt a little lighter. The hallway outside the galley was still empty, the lights low, the world asleep. But something had shifted inside him. The ache in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it had loosened. Rosa's words, her presence, had reminded him of something he didn't even realize he'd lost on this yacht. Dignity. Not the kind the world awards with applause, the quiet kind, the kind that lives in simple acts. Tea shared at midnight, a warm slice of banana bread, a conversation with no cameras and no judgment. Keanu climbed the stairs back to the guest quarters, his footsteps soft against the carpeted floor. He reached his cabin, opened the door, and stepped inside. For the first time since arriving, the room didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place to rest. He set his boots aside and slid under the covers, the blanket still faintly holding the scent of salt air. His thoughts wandered, not toward the cruelty of the past 2 days, but toward Rosa's story. Her sick father, her hands steady and calloused, her belief that feeding someone could be an act of healing. She hadn't asked who he was. She hadn't cared. She saw a tired soul and chose to give. And that had changed everything. As he drifted toward sleep, his mind returned to her words. Sometimes the best hearts are the quiet ones. He'd spent so much of his life trying not to be seen, trying not to interrupt, trying not to take up space. But maybe there was power in that silence. Maybe strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered from behind a kitchen door at midnight, offering warmth instead of judgment. He turned over and stared at the ceiling, the stars just barely visible through the small cabin window. He thought about all the noise above deck, the jeers, the false praise, the ego. And then he thought about the soft clink of Rosa's teacup, the smell of cinnamon, the weight of honest words. It didn't make the cruelty go away, but it made it smaller. It reminded him of the people who mattered, the kind who didn't shout their worth, the kind who gave what they could, when they could, and asked for nothing in return. He closed his eyes, the tension in his shoulders easing. The yacht continued to glide forward into the night, cutting through the water like a story yet to be told. And in that silence, wrapped in stillness and gratitude, Keanu finally slept. Not the shallow sleep of someone hiding pain, but the deep, steady sleep of a man who had found, even for a moment, something real in a world built on illusion. By the time dawn began to stretch across the water, painting gold over dark blue, He was still asleep, still dreaming. And this time, it wasn't about escape. It was about returning. The morning came soft and silver. The sea stretched out flat like polished slate, and the yacht moved through it like a quiet whisper. Keanu woke more rested than he had in weeks. There were no sounds of mockery, no expectations knocking at his door, only the memory of Rose's kindness lingering in his chest like a candle still burning. He showered, pulled on clean jeans and his same worn flannel, then made his way toward the lower levels of the ship. He didn't want breakfast under chandeliers. He wanted silence, something real, something useful. A narrow stairwell led him to the engine corridor, where everything smelled of steel, oil, and heat. The hum of turbines echoed like a living heartbeat. He followed it until he came to a heavy metal door, half open, with a faint buzz coming from inside. He knocked once, then pushed through. The engine room was enormous. Pipes along every wall, rows of consoles blinking softly, fans turning with constant rhythm. At the center stood a man bent over a thick metal housing unit, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands covered in grease. The man looked up. Mid-30s maybe, tan skin, dark curly hair pulled back, a wrench in one hand, suspicion in his eyes. "You're not lost, are you?" the man asked. Keanu shook his head, just curious. The man arched an eyebrow. "That's not something I hear down here often. I'm Keanu." The man smirked. "Yeah, I know." He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and crossed the room. "Mateo, chief engineer, or as the guests upstairs seem to think of me, ghost in the machine." Keanu smiled. "I thought I'd say hello to the person keeping us all from drifting into the abyss." Mateo chuckled. "Well, in that case, welcome to the lungs of the ship." Keanu glanced around. "It's beautiful, in a raw kind of way." Mateo walked over to a wall-mounted blueprint and tapped a corner. "This turbine system here? It was a nightmare when I first got here. Wasted energy, pressure drops. The original design was flashy but inefficient." He paused, then looked at Keanu more seriously. "I redesigned it. Quietly, off the record. Saved 30% on fuel draw. Cut emissions in half." Keanu's brow lifted. "That's incredible. Does Sebastian know?" Mateo scoffed. "I sent it to his team. No response. They're too busy buying art to hang in the stairwells. No one wants to hear from the guy who works with dirty hands." Keanu walked over and examined the console. The wiring was clean. The modifications, brilliant. "You should be designing entire vessels," he said softly. Mateo looked at him, surprised. Keanu didn't mean it as flattery. He meant it as truth. Mateo leaned against the table and crossed his arms. "You're not what I expected." Keanu gave a small shrug. "Neither is this yacht." They both smiled, and for the first time that day, something began to shift.
A quiet alliance was forming, and it had nothing to do with power. Mateo reached for a tablet and pulled up a diagnostic display, showing real-time energy consumption across the ship. "These numbers shouldn't exist," he said, pointing to the screen. "Not on a vessel this size." But the system I designed bypasses 2 outdated regulators and uses an adaptive feedback loop I wrote myself, completely off the books. Keanu studied the layout with genuine interest. "How long did it take you to figure that out?" Mateo exhaled slowly. 2 months, a lot of sleepless nights. I tested everything 3 times before I even told the mechanic team. I knew if I submitted it to the brass before it worked perfectly, they'd shoot it down. Keanu nodded, tracing a wire path on the diagram. "You didn't just fix something broken, you elevated it." Mateo smiled faintly, but there was weariness behind it. "And yet, up top, they treat me like I'm just here to check gauges and tighten bolts." Keanu looked around the humming room. "You're keeping this ship alive." "No one sees it that way," Mateo said. "Not unless it breaks. Then I'm the miracle man, until it works again and I disappear. Keanu understood more than he said. That's the thing about being behind the scenes, Mateo added. People enjoy the show, but they never think about the people holding the stage up. Keanu nodded slowly. I've been on a lot of stages. I've watched the people backstage do more with half the credit. Mateo looked at him curiously. Is that why you're down here? Hiding from the spotlight? Keanu gave a quiet smile. Not hiding, just breathing. They stood in silence for a moment, the steady thrum of the engine offering a kind of heartbeat between them. Mateo walked over to a steel cabinet and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a set of hand tools, modified with his own etchings. Measured cuts, custom grips, little improvements no one else would notice. I make these, he said, not because I have to, because it matters. A 0.5 millimeter in design can change everything when you're working with delicate systems. Keanu picked up one of the tools and ran his fingers along the custom notches. You treat your work like craft? Mateo nodded. It's not about the job title. It's about doing something right, even if no one sees it. Keanu met his eyes. I see it. Mateo looked surprised, then grateful. You be the first guest on this ship who does. Keanu handed the tool back carefully. When you work in a world that only rewards noise, quiet excellence scares people. Because they can't control it, Mateo added. Or outshine it, Keanu said. They both smiled, small, honest smiles that didn't need to impress anyone. For the first time, Mateo didn't feel invisible. And Keanu didn't feel alone. Something real had sparked between them. Two men who had been underestimated, dismissed, but still chose to build something better anyway. Mateo wiped his hands again and motioned toward a narrow bench tucked beside the main engine console. You want to see something else? He asked. Keanu nodded and they sat together on the metal seat. Mateo tapped on his tablet again and brought up a new set of schematics. Ones that looked far more ambitious than the current systems. This, Mateo said, is my dream. A fully self-sustaining vessel, solar-integrated, hybrid propulsion, water-purifying waste systems, no noise, no pollution, just motion and purpose. Keanu studied the drawing. It was more than a dream. It was a blueprint waiting for belief. This is beautiful, Keanu said. Have you ever shown this to anyone? My brother, Mateo replied. He thinks I'm wasting my time. Says people like us don't get invited to change things. We're just here to make sure the engine runs while someone else steers the ship. Keanu looked down for a moment, then back at him. People said the same thing to me once, that I wasn't enough to lead anything, that I should stay where I was. But you didn't, Mateo said. Keanu shook his head. I kept showing up. I kept working, not to prove them wrong, just to honor what I love. Mateo exhaled. It's hard to keep believing when no one sees what you're carrying. They will, Keanu said softly. Eventually, someone sees. You just have to keep building. There was a long pause. Then Mateo said, you're not like the others on this yacht. I noticed. Keanu smiled. You don't try to take up space, but somehow you make it feel safer. Keanu didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded. Mateo stood and placed the tablet back on the counter. Come by anytime. Not many people here like talking about machines. Or dreams. Keanu stood with him. I'll be back. They shook hands, not in the way of showy introductions, but in the quiet, firm grip of mutual understanding. As Keanu made his way back up the stairs, the hum of the engine still in his ears, something had changed in him. He had walked into the engine room out of quiet curiosity, but he left with something more, a sense of alliance, a recognition, a shared story with someone who didn't want fame, but function. Not applause, but purpose. He passed through the service corridors slowly, thinking of Mateo's blueprints, of his own long road, of the way good work is often buried beneath louder voices and bigger names. Well, not forever. Not always. He climbed the last step onto the guest deck, where laughter and posturing still echoed faintly in the distance. Let them talk, he thought. Down below, something better was already being built.
Keanu wandered deeper into the ship than he ever had before. After leaving the engine room, something kept pulling him downward, toward the areas where real work lived. The parts of the yacht not found on brochures or Instagram stories. He passed storage rooms, crew bunks, low-ceilinged hallways that smelled of metal and warm wires. Then he heard a rhythmic tapping, not mechanical. Human. Code. He turned a corner and found a slightly open door lit in cool blue. Inside, screens lined the walls. Maps, ship diagnostics, weather data, communication logs. In the center sat a young woman with short hair tied in a loose knot, her fingers dancing across the keyboard like they were playing a quiet symphony only she could hear. She didn't look up when Keanu stepped inside. "I know you're not supposed to be here," she said without turning, "but neither am I, so I guess we're even." Keanu smiled and stepped closer, eyes scanning the screens. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," she replied, "unless you've come to crash the network, in which case, I'll need another minute." He laughed gently. "You keep the yacht online?" "Barely," she said, pausing to stretch her wrists. "Storm interference yesterday. I had to reconfigure 3 transponders and write a patch just to keep the radar feeds clean." Keanu stepped closer. "And you do all this alone?" She turned in her chair and faced him fully for the first time. Young, 20s maybe, sharp eyes, sleepless but alert. "Elena," she said, offering a hand. "Keanu, I know." They shook once. Elena turned back to her screen. "Most guests don't come down here." "I guess you're not most guests." Keanu looked around the space, modest, cluttered but pulsing with intelligence. "You wrote that code, running on the right screen?" "All of it. It's elegant." Her fingers paused. She looked at him sideways. "That's the first time anyone's ever said that." "Well, it is." She gave a small smile, then leaned back in her chair. "I taught myself to code when I was 13. Started with an old laptop and some pirated textbooks. This," she said, gesturing around the control room, "is my whole world right now." Keanu sat on a nearby crate. "You ever want to do something beyond this ship?" Her eyes lit up, then dimmed again. "Every day, I had this dream. Build a global learning network. Like a place where kids from remote villages could learn from real engineers, scientists, teachers, free, accessible, no gatekeepers." Keanu was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "That's not just a dream, that's a vision." She shrugged. "I keep writing code, hoping someone notices." He looked at her, really looked. And then he said softly, "I noticed." Elena blinked. Just once. But something shifted in her face, like a breath she hadn't let herself take in years had finally escaped. She turned back to her keyboard, her voice quieter now. "Most people only notice when the Wi-Fi drops." Keanu smiled faintly. "But they don't realize someone's down here catching the signal before it falls." "No, they don't," she said. "And that's okay most of the time. I like being invisible. Until I don't." He leaned forward slightly. "Why do you stay?" She shrugged, watching the code scroll across her screen. "Because the system still runs. Because I get to fix things. Because there's beauty in making connections work, even when people never see the wires." She paused, then added, "And because I owe someone." Keanu stayed quiet, letting her find her words. "My little sister," Elena said, her voice soft. "She's 15. We grew up in a small town where the only internet came from a broken satellite dish taped to a fence post. I taught her how to code using a cracked tablet and my old USB sticks. She smiled, faint but real. Last year, she built a program that helped kids in our town get into math tutoring online. They've never even met a college professor, but now they can video chat with one in Buenos Aires or New York. That's what keeps me going. Keanu was still. That's why I want to build something bigger, she continued. Not just for my sister, for kids like her who are bright, hungry, and stuck behind broken fences. He nodded, slow and reverent. You're not invisible, Elena. She turned to him, a mix of curiosity and disbelief. He continued. You're the reason someone else gets to dream. You make the impossible quietly possible, and that matters more than you know. Elena looked at him for a long time, then said, That's easy for you to say. You're the guy people listen to. He smiled. Most of the time, people only listen after you've already walked through the fire. She laughed under her breath. So, you're saying I'm just in the fire stage? Feels like it, doesn't it? Yeah, she whispered. Every day. There was another pause. Then she asked, Why are you really here, Keanu, on this yacht? You don't belong with them. His eyes softened. Maybe I was supposed to, but I don't think I ever did. She tilted her head. So, you came looking for something else? I think I came looking for people like you. Elena sat still for a beat, then slowly turned her screen toward him. I've been building the prototype, she said, for the learning network. You want to see it? He didn't hesitate. I'd be honored. As she walked him through the interface, her voice picked up. Her fingers moved faster. The code, the structure, the strategy. It was brilliant. But even more powerful than the software was the belief growing in the room. As Elena clicked through the final screen of her prototype, Keanu leaned closer, eyes focused, absorbing every detail. The platform was simple, clean, and intuitive, but behind that simplicity was depth. Modular tools for teachers, real-time translation features, offline access modes for areas with weak signals. Everything had been thought through with care. This is more than impressive, Keanu said. This could change lives. She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. That's the point. The room fell into a thoughtful hush, the only sound coming from the quiet hum of the servers and the soft blinking of signal indicators across the wall. Keanu sat back and looked around at the space, cramped, underfunded, and glowing with quiet genius. He knew this feeling. The calm before something meaningful was finally given a chance. You've been doing all this from a control room beneath a party, he said. Elena laughed gently. Isn't that life sometimes? He nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. Then, more seriously, he asked, What's stopping you from launching it? Her shoulders dropped a little. Funding, mostly, infrastructure, and belief. It's hard to sell a dream when you don't look like someone people expect to dream big. Keanu was silent for a beat. Then he said, Sometimes all it takes is one person who believes in you out loud. Elena looked down at her hands, her voice quiet again. Why do you care? He answered honestly. Because I've felt like you. Seen but not understood. Respected publicly but doubted privately. And because the world needs builders more than it needs spectators. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, You think this really matters? I know it does, he said. You're building bridges where most people just build gates. Elena looked back at her screen, her eyes shining but holding back emotion. I want her to have more than I did, my sister. I want her to feel like she can reach out and the world won't slap her hand away. Keanu stood and walked slowly to the center of the room, turning back to face her. Then I think you already succeeded. This code, it isn't just software. It's proof that someone who was never invited to the table decided to build her own. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You really are different. I just pay attention, Keanu said. That's all. Elena smiled again, fuller this time, and closed the prototype. Thank you. For seeing it. For seeing me. He gave a gentle nod. Some people change the world quietly, line by line, signal by signal. And one day, the noise clears, and people finally realize who they should have been listening to all along. In that quiet, between circuit boards and glowing monitors, something real took root. Keanu didn't just believe in her code. He believed in her. And for Elena, that was a first. The sun was low on the horizon when Keanu returned to the upper deck. The laughter hit him before the door even closed behind him. Loud, unbothered, gilded with confidence. The kind of laughter that came from people who believed the world revolved only when they nodded. The tables had been rearranged into a loose circle. Cushioned chairs, wine glasses full, a strange stage set in the middle like a courtroom made for entertainment. Guests lounged with practiced elegance, sipping aged scotch and swirling half-truths like fine perfume. Sebastian stood at the center, arms wide like a master of ceremonies. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, our next event is not a competition, it's a conversation. A legacy trial, if you will. A light chuckles. Sebastian smiled as Keanu appeared in view. Ah, perfect timing. Our guest of honor has returned. Keanu paused near the railing, unsure. Something was off. Something theatrical in the way the crowd parted to make room for him. He didn't like it. Mr. Reeves, Sebastian said with false warmth, tonight we explore the true worth of a public image. We've all seen the headlines, the memes, the reverent internet posts. He paced slowly. But who is the real Keanu Reeves? And has the world confused humility with greatness? More laughter followed. It wasn't warm. A woman in a silver gown raised her hand mockingly. I'll start. Keanu, do you think being sat on a bench makes you deep or just very good at sitting still? The crowd roared. Another man chimed in, twirling his glass. Your movies were fun 20 years ago, but now? You're like a VHS tape someone refuses to throw out. A third leaned forward, eyes cold behind his charm. Be honest. If you weren't a meme, would anyone still care about you? Keanu didn't flinch. He stood calmly, hands in his pockets, watching them, not with anger, but with a sadness that went deeper than offense. Then Sebastian took center stage again. Let's not forget his philanthropy, he said, donating money quietly, refusing luxury. Noble, yes, but is it truly leadership or just convenient sainthood? A final guest, younger, smug, and sharp like glass, delivered the last blow. You're just the internet's pet actor. Polite, sad-eyed, conveniently quiet. You fit what people want to believe about goodness. But goodness isn't real. It's branding. The silence that followed was thick. Keanu looked at them, one by one, not with hate, but with heartbreak. Then he said, in a voice so calm it silenced the ocean breeze, maybe I am. They looked confused. Maybe I am just a guy on a bench, just a meme, just someone who never wanted to be more than a decent human being. No applause followed. He looked around at them. These people in silk and gold, with perfect teeth and hollow eyes. And he said, but I'd rather be quietly kind than loudly empty. The words hung there, but their response was laughter. Cruel, loud, unmoved. Keanu nodded slowly, took one step back from the circle, then turned without another word and walked away. His face didn't break, but something inside him did. Keanu didn't stop walking until the sound of laughter faded behind the metal door. He took the back stairs, two at a time, needing distance, needing air. The sky above was painted with deep oranges and slow-fading blues, but it felt like a false comfort. Beauty layered over bruises. He reached the lower deck, near the stern where few ever ventured. There was a bench tucked against the wall near the maintenance lockers. He sat down slowly, hands clasped loosely between his knees, shoulders low. The mock trial had ended, but its weight still pressed on his chest. It wasn't the insults that hurt. He'd heard worse, read worse, lived worse. It was the ease with which they delivered them, the smiles, the effortless cruelty masked as entertainment. Like tearing someone down had become sport, and dignity was just another disposable luxury. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He wasn't humiliated. He was tired. Tired of pretending it didn't matter. Tired of standing quietly while people equated kindness with weakness. He'd never asked to be worshipped. But he also hadn't asked to be dissected. And somehow, those were the only two categories the world allowed. He heard soft footsteps approaching but didn't look up. Then came the voice. "You didn't deserve that." It was Rosa. She walked over, holding a small thermos and a tin cup. "I figured you might need this," she said, pouring tea into the cup and handing it to him without waiting for permission. He accepted it, hands warm around the metal. "Thank you." She sat beside him, not speaking at first. After a while, she said, "They only laugh because they're afraid." Keanu glanced sideways. "Afraid of what?" "Out of the thing you represent," she said gently. "That you can be powerful without being cruel. That you can walk away with grace instead of lashing out. That you don't need to play their game to be whole." He looked at the tea, then took a slow sip. She continued, "I've seen that look before, on my father's face. He was a proud man, too quiet for politics, too honest for negotiation. The world didn't know what to do with him, so it dismissed him." Keanu nodded faintly. "I know that feeling. But you stayed calm," she said. "Even when they tried to make you fold." Keanu looked out at the water. "I didn't stay calm for them. I stayed calm so I wouldn't lose myself." Rosa placed a hand gently on his arm. "And that's why you're still standing." He smiled faintly. "Doesn't feel like standing." "It is," she said. "Standing doesn't always look like fists and shouting. Sometimes it looks like walking away." He closed his eyes for a second, letting the truth of her words steady him. "You're not alone down here," Rosa added. "Not anymore." The sun dipped lower, slipping beneath the horizon like it was giving way to something more honest. And as the stars began to blink into view, Keanu sat with his tea, with Rosa, with silence, and with a soul bruised but unbroken. The night was quieter than any before. No laughter echoed from the deck above. The wind had softened, and the sea rocked the yacht like a lullaby it didn't quite deserve. Keanu sat on the floor beside the engine room door, back against the cool metal wall. His legs were stretched out in front of him, ankles crossed. He held a cup Rosa had insisted he take with him, still warm. The tea had gone a little bitter, but he drank it anyway. It reminded him of her, tough, necessary, honest. He hadn't gone back up, not after the mock trial, not after the final laughter, and certainly not to be seen. He stayed below, where the hum of the engines sounded like resilience. The hallway lights buzzed softly overhead, and for a while, Keanu didn't expect anyone to come. But they did. First, Rosa. She came around the corner holding a folded towel and sat beside him without a word, placing the towel between them so they wouldn't lean on the cold floor. "You left your cup," she said gently. He nodded. "I didn't want to ask for more." "You didn't have to." They sat in silence, until footsteps echoed from the opposite end of the corridor. Mateo appeared next, still in his coveralls, a faint smudge of oil on his cheek. He carried 2 bottles of water and passed one to each of them before sitting cross-legged in front of Keanu. "Nice night to be human," Mateo said, voice soft. "I didn't want to ruin yours," Keanu said. "You didn't," Mateo replied. "They tried, you didn't." A minute passed before another shadow joined them. Elena stepped into view, hair tied back in a loose bun, tablet tucked under her arm like a book she never put down. She dropped down next to Matteo and let out a long breath. I guess I'm the only one who brought nothing. You brought yourself, Rosa said. That's the part that matters. Keanu looked at the three of them. Rosa, Matteo, Elena. People who lived below deck, not just physically, but in the way the world saw them. Unseen, undervalued, but vital. Rosa was the first to speak. I heard what they said to you, she said, and I wasn't going to bring this up, but you helped my father 2 years ago. He had advanced pancreatic cancer. The hospital denied treatment. Your foundation didn't. Keanu blinked. I didn't know. You didn't have to, she replied. You helped anyway. You saved his life. She paused. He died peacefully 6 months ago. At home. With dignity. Because of you. Keanu looked down, throat tight. Matteo cleared his throat. When I was 17, I got a scholarship for kids who showed mechanical aptitude, paid for by a small grant tied to a celebrity charity. No press, no photos, just quiet support. He smiled slightly. I used that to get into a trade school and then engineering. I tracked it back later. It was your name on the trust. Keanu shook his head. I never wanted credit. That's why it mattered, Matteo said. Elena looked up from her lap. The first place I ever touched a real computer? An internet cafe in my neighborhood. It was built with tech from a donation program your name was on. Keanu sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed. Keanu's throat tightened as he looked at them. 3 strangers who somehow weren't strangers at all. People who had walked beside his impact without ever needing to shake his hand. Now they were here, surrounding him in the belly of a ship that had tried to humiliate him. He swallowed hard. I didn't know. I never saw the names. Rosa placed a hand over his. You didn't need to. You just chose to help. Elena leaned forward, eyes bright even in the dim corridor light. You gave without asking for applause. And now you're sitting here, thinking you're small because a group of empty people tried to convince you you are. Keanu met her gaze. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. Matteo rubbed his palms together, like trying to warm the cold air between them. You know, it's funny. They call you soft. They think kindness is weakness. But kindness takes more strength than arrogance ever will. Elena nodded. It's easy to mock. It's hard to keep building when the world doesn't clap. Keanu looked down again, then whispered, So why does it still hurt? Because you're human, Rosa said, without hesitation. You're not made of stone, Keanu. That's what makes you real. Matteo shifted his weight and leaned back against the bulkhead. What they said upstairs wasn't about you. It was about what you reflect back at them. You made them feel something they haven't felt in a long time. Shame. Maybe they tried to laugh it off, Elena added, because they don't know how to face themselves. Rosa squeezed Keanu's hand once more before letting go. But we see you. Not the headlines, not the roles, not the man they've turned into a myth, just you. He looked at them one by one. These weren't fans. They weren't charity cases. They were proof. Living, breathing proof that even the quietest acts of good could ripple across oceans and come back when least expected. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I came here thinking I was supposed to represent something, he said. That maybe I had to prove myself all over again. Matteo smiled. You don't have to prove anything. Elena leaned in. You already did, years ago, when no one was watching. Keanu nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside him. Not pride, not victory. Just clarity. A kind of grounded truth he hadn't felt in a long time. What you do from here, Rosa said gently. It's up to you. But know this. We've got your back, no matter what they try next. Elena added, We're with you, Keanu, all the way. Mateo extended his hand. Below deck, above all. Keanu looked at their hands, their eyes, their stories, and for the first time since stepping onto the yacht, he didn't feel alone. He clasped Mateo's hand firmly. Then let's make this count. The alliance wasn't grand or loud, but it was strong. Stronger than gold. Stronger than titles. Stronger than shame. And together they would rise. The first sign was the sudden drop in air pressure. A stillness that wasn't peace, but warning. The sea, moments ago calm and glistening, now rolled heavier under the hull. Keanu noticed it the moment he stepped back into the corridor. The floor had a different sway. A tension in the walls, in the silence. Then came the jolt. A sudden, sharp lurch of the yacht, enough to make the lights flicker. Emergency strobes pulsed red down the hall. A voice came over the intercom, shaky, rushed. Storm cell approaching fast. All non-essential guests return to quarters immediately. Crew, stations. Repeat, all guests to quarters. Then silence. The line cut out mid-commander. Keanu didn't hesitate. He turned and ran toward the engine room. By the time he reached it, the storm had begun to announce itself. Waves slapped harder against the hull, the groan of metal filling the corridors like a warning bell. Inside the engine room, Mateo was already working. Sweat streaked down his face as he barked into a headset that clearly wasn't working. His screen flashed with alerts. Systems were overloading. The Elena system went dark 5 minutes ago, Mateo said, not even looking up. Navigation's glitching. I need to reset the turbine controls manually. But I need someone on the circuit board in the relay bay to keep voltage stable. Tell me where, Keanu said. Mateo pointed to the right. Third panel, orange box, hold the breaker when I say. Keanu rushed over, tore the panel open, and braced his hands inside. Sparks danced across the metal, but he didn't flinch. Mateo gave the cue, and Keanu pressed down. The lights in the room flickered once, then steadied. Good, Mateo muttered. We might hold this. Upstairs, chaos erupted. Elena sprinted into the control room, already dripping from rain. She had gone above deck to help assess damage to the satellite link, but now the monitors in front of her blinked in and out, static eating the maps. Communication with the mainland had gone completely silent. She typed frantically, lips moving in silent calculation. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Nothing held for more than a few seconds. Then came another crash, this one from above. Something had hit the upper deck. The ship shuddered. Alarms blared. Elena's screen flashed a red warning, navigation error. The storm had knocked the GPS out. Keanu arrived seconds later, panting, soaked from a hallway leak. What do you need? Backup routing, Elena snapped. I can hardwire the relay if someone can hold the channel open. I'll do it. You don't know how. Tell me once. I'll do the rest. She stared at him, then nodded. You see the cable there? Keep it elevated off the floor. It's shorting in the wet air. Don't let it touch anything. Keanu knelt immediately, both hands on the line, holding it aloft like a lifeline. Elena worked with urgency, code spilling across the screen. Below deck, Rosa had turned the galley into a makeshift safe haven. Frightened crew and 2 crying guests had taken shelter there, shivering. She moved among them with calm hands and a steady voice, placing bowls of soup in their palms and whispering, "We're going to be okay." And somehow they believed her. The storm raged above like a beast, clawing at the sky. On the upper decks, waves slammed against the hull with bone-shaking force. Wind screamed through the railings, tearing at anything unsecured. Screams echoed faintly, panicked guests trying to navigate soaked floors in designer shoes. But down below, in the control room, calm had taken root. Elena's eyes scanned lines of cascading code. Her fingers didn't pause, not once, not even when thunder cracked directly overhead. Keanu remained crouched, still holding the cable high, his arms straining, muscles twitching with effort, but his focus locked on Elena. "You've got this," he said, voice low and steady. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. His presence was her anchor. Then her screen blinked, once, twice, and stabilized. "Navigation reestablished," she whispered, then louder, "I've got it." Mateo's voice crackled through the room's backup speaker, patched together with makeshift circuits. "Stabilizers are holding. Rudder's back online. Patch weather telemetry into Channel B," Elena responded. "Done." Keanu finally lowered the cable, exhaling in relief. Elena turned to him. "You just saved our ability to steer this ship." He gave a tired grin. "Not bad for a washed-up charity case." Her expression softened. "You lead by serving, Keanu. That's rare." A silence followed, thicker than gratitude, deeper than praise. Then a sharp slam echoed from the back hallway. Sebastian stumbled into the room, soaked and pale, his suit jacket hanging half off his shoulder. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "The guests are panicking." Elena didn't turn. "We've restored navigation. We're holding course." Sebastian's eyes scanned the room, code flashing on screens, wires snaking across the floor, Keanu kneeling beside exposed circuits like a mechanic, not a movie star. "This is chaos," Sebastian hissed. "Where is my crew?" Keanu stood. "They're working, the ones who didn't hide." Sebastian's jaw twitched. "You think this makes you noble? You're still just—" But Elena cut him off, voice sharp. "We don't have time for speeches. If you're not here to help, get out of the way." Sebastian blinked, stunned. Keanu stepped forward, not threatening, just firm. "The crew below deck, the people you ignored, are the reason this ship isn't drifting in the dark right now. You don't get to—" "No," Keanu said quietly. "I didn't come here to be judged, but I'll stand here now, because these people deserve better. And so does this ship." Sebastian's mouth opened, then shut. Without another word, he turned and walked out, footsteps fading behind him. Elena sank into her chair, breathing hard. "He came down here to look important. You came down here to do the work." Keanu nodded. "That's the only kind of leadership I've ever trusted." From the hallway, Rosa appeared, her apron stained with broth, a tray of tea in her hands. "The storm's not over," she said, "but the worst of it is passing." Keanu took a cup, warm again in his palms. "Then we hold steady until the sky clears." And together, the four of them did exactly that. Not because anyone told them to, but because they could. Because when the storm hit, it wasn't titles or wealth or speeches that saved the ship. It was grace and grit and the hands willing to hold the line. The storm refused to give up easily. An hour after restoring navigation, the ship lurched violently to the left. A piercing alarm echoed through the lower deck. An overload in the starboard generator. The backup power, stretched thin, was failing again. Keanu was already moving before Elena could shout. "Mateo needs help! Engine bay 2!" He ran. His boots slapped the wet metal floor as he bolted down the corridor, arms aching, legs sore from holding wires and dodging blasts of heat, but his pace never slowed. In the generator room, Mateo was kneeling near a tangled cluster of circuits, the emergency override panel hissing with exposed current. The smell of ozone filled the air. Keanu dropped beside him. "What's going wrong?" Mateo didn't look up. "Secondary circuit boards fried. We're flying blind on propulsion. If we don't reroute now, the rudder control will lock up." "Tell me what to do." Mateo pointed to a bundle of wires snaking through the junction. "We need to bridge power from the core conduit through here, but the contact points are unstable. We'll have to strip and connect manually." "Manual means exposed," Keanu said. "Yeah, sparks. Maybe fire. But it's the only way to keep us from hitting open reef. We've drifted 5 degrees off course." Keanu nodded once. "Let's do it." Without waiting, he grabbed a set of pliers, yanked back the insulation on the first wire, and pressed it into position against the copper lead. A flash of sparks leapt from the connection, licking at his hands. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't let go. Mateo mirrored him on the other side, their work synchronized like muscle memory. When I say now, you connect the blue wire." Keanu waited. Sparks crackled again. Heat rose from the panel in waves. "Now!" He shoved the blue lead into place. For a moment, everything surged. The lights flickered, the circuit buzzed, and then the hum of the system steadied. "Power routed," Mateo gasped. From above, Elena's voice burst through the intercom. "I've got GPS back. We're back on target. Reef proximity, 80 meters and closing." Mateo and Keanu locked eyes. "That gives us 20 seconds." Keanu lunged to the panel and threw the emergency throttle override. The force nearly knocked him backward, but the system responded. A deep mechanical groan rolled through the ship as the rudder fought the current and realigned. On the bridge, Captain Alvarez leaned over his monitor. The reef, jagged and sharp, loomed ahead on the sonar screen. Elena shouted, "We'll clear it, maybe." Maybe became yes, with 6 seconds to spare. The yacht veered just enough. The reef passed within feet. Silence fell across the entire ship, as if the ocean itself had paused. Captain Alvarez exhaled slowly and turned to his first mate, who rerouted that circuit. A tech pointed at the engine bay's live feed. It showed Keanu, soaked, burned and breathing hard, next to Mateo. "That man just saved all our lives," Alvarez said. Back in the generator room, Keanu leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged waves. A small burn bloomed red on the inside of his wrist, another across his forearm. He didn't notice them. Not yet. Mateo was already checking the board for voltage stability. "We're holding steady. Backup systems are clean. I think we've got breathing room now." Keanu nodded, sliding down the wall to sit, sweat and rain mingling across his face. "I thought movie stunts were tough," he muttered. Mateo chuckled. "You just beat one of the worst real ones." From the hallway, footsteps pounded fast. Elena skidded into view, tablet still in hand, hair soaked but eyes shining. "We cleared the reef." "I don't know how, but we cleared it," she said, kneeling beside them. "I do," Mateo said, nodding toward Keanu. "He held the line, literally." Elena looked at Keanu's burned hands and frowned. "You need a medic." "I need 5 minutes of silence," he said, chuckling wearily. But silence wouldn't last long. Upstairs, the main deck doors creaked open one by one. Guests who had hidden in their staterooms or clutched each other in quiet terror now stepped out, dazed. The sea had calmed slightly, the storm beginning to pass, but the damage was done. In more ways than one. Victoria, the woman in pearls who had mocked Keanu's flannel shirt, stood near the railing, mascara streaked down her cheeks, trembling. Another guest, the tech CEO who'd ridiculed his career, whispered, "We were seconds from crashing." They didn't say Keanu's name yet, but the story was already unfolding without words. Below deck, Rosa emerged from the galley, apron still damp, her arms full of blankets and dry towels. She moved through the quiet crew, offering warmth like a balm. Her voice remained steady. "It's over. You're safe now. Let's breathe together." Captain Alvarez stepped into the lounge, gathering his senior crew. "Full systems check. Secure all decks. I want a report in 10. Then, after a pause, he added, "And someone get Keanu Reeves a first aid kit. He just did what half our guests wouldn't." A wave of surprise rippled through the crew. The same man who had been laughed at. The same one they called a relic. He had saved them. No cape. No camera. Just grit, timing, and the will to act when others froze. Keanu remained below for a while longer, bandaged quietly by one of the younger crew medics. Elena sat nearby, typing new protocols into the recovery systems. Mateo wiped his hands, then patted Keanu on the shoulder. "No one's going to forget this." Keanu gave a tired smile. "That's not why I did it." "I know," Mateo said. "That's why it matters." Above, guests moved slowly through the halls, whispering what they'd seen on the monitors. The man in the flannel, the one they had mocked, the one who had run toward the fire when others ran from it. Sebastian had not been seen since the near collision, but his absence only highlighted what had been revealed. Leadership wasn't made on stage. It was forged in storms. And somewhere below, in the hum of machinery and the flicker of patched circuits, a quiet truth had taken root. The man they had dismissed had become the reason they were alive. By morning, the sky had cleared. The ocean shimmered again under soft light, as if the night hadn't just nearly shattered everything. The waves, calmer now, nudged gently against the hull of the celestial pearl, like a slow, thoughtful apology. Above deck, the storm's destruction was still visible. Scattered cushions, a snapped parasol, a cracked railing. But the true damage wasn't to the yacht. It was to the illusion that had carried so many aboard. The guests gathered slowly on the main deck. No champagne glasses this time. No practiced laughter. They came in sweaters and shawls, some barefoot, some red-unk from sleeplessness. They stood like children pulled from a dream, unsure of the world they now faced. Captain Alvarez stepped to the center. His voice, usually reserved for navigation commands and formal protocol, rang out with something different. Conviction. I've captained vessels through typhoons in the Atlantic. I've lost power in the middle of the Sargasso Sea. But I've never seen a moment as revealing as what happened last night. No one dared speak. He continued, "Some of you were below deck, some of you were crying, some were silent, some prayed. And that's human. Fear is human." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the guests. But while many of us waited for rescue, one man ran toward the heart of the danger. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. He turned, gesturing. Keanu stepped forward. He wore the same flannel shirt. It was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up. His forearms were bandaged lightly. His face was calm, tired, but upright. He didn't smile. He didn't posture. He simply stood with Rosa, Mateo, and Elena flanking him. "This man," Alvarez said, "was mocked by you, laughed at, dismissed." Murmurs rippled through the guests like cold water. But when this ship lost direction, when the reef came within seconds of tearing us apart, he didn't run. He rewired the core systems with Mateo. He held electrical conduits steady so Elena could restore our signal. He burned his own skin to save people who had offered him nothing but cruelty. No one could meet Keanu's eyes. Alvarez's voice grew quieter. "That's what leadership looks like." Silence deepened. Then came movement. From the back of the group, Sebastian emerged. Hair slicked back, a blazer hastily thrown over his shirt, his posture was still polished, but his eyes darted, scanning faces, seeking favor that no longer waited for him. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to..." But no one turned to face him. No one listened. Instead, several guests stepped away from him, placing space between their presence and his. Victoria, who once led the jeers, folded her arms and stared at the floor. The tech CEO who'd mocked Keanu's clothing now stood quietly beside one of the railings, his knuckles white on the polished wood. Sebastian tried again. Look, last night, emotions ran high. I never intended..." But the words were hollow, and this time, no one was buying. A different power had taken root, one not drawn from wealth or titles, but from truth, from the actions of a man who had asked for nothing and given everything. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence said what the storm could not erase. Sebastian lowered his hands slowly. His voice faded into the silence like smoke vanishing in daylight. He stood alone now, stripped of the easy charisma that once cloaked him. All that remained was discomfort. His and everyone else's. One by one, the guests turned away from him. Not in anger, but in something colder. Disinterest. The kind that follows exposure. The kind that sees through a mask and simply walks past. Sebastian stepped back, shrinking into the crowd that no longer saw him as its host. Keanu still hadn't spoken. Instead, he looked to Rosa, Mateo, and Elena. He gave them each a nod. It was Rosa who stepped forward first. She faced the stunned guests and said, "When the storm hit, I watched people panic. I watched others freeze. But I saw someone run toward the danger." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. But every syllable carried the quiet certainty of someone who had nothing to prove. I didn't know who he was when he showed up in my kitchen. All I saw was someone kind, someone tired, someone real. Mateo stepped beside her. He never said his name when he helped fix the cooling valves. Never asked for attention when the system nearly exploded in his hands. He just did what needed to be done. Elena followed. He didn't tell me I mattered. He showed me. He saw my work, my code, and treated it like it had value when no one else even knew I existed. The guests looked back at Keanu, and now they saw not the actor, not the flannel, not the myths, just the man. Keanu took a breath and finally spoke, his voice even, unembellished. "I came here because I was invited to something called a gathering of visionaries. I thought it meant a conversation, a sharing of ideas, but what I found was judgment, condescension, performance." He looked directly at no one and yet somehow addressed them all. "I don't need apologies. I don't want revenge. What I want, what I've always wanted, is to be useful. That's it." His gaze moved to Elena. "To build things that help people learn." Then to Mateo. "To support people who keep the world running." Then to Rosa. "To stand beside people who nourish others without asking to be thanked." He turned back to the group. "You don't have to remember my name, but maybe remember this. When everything breaks, the person who saves you might not wear a suit. They might be someone you ignored, or laughed at, or dismissed. A beat passed, and they might help you anyway." The air felt different now. Thicker, heavier, but not with guilt, with reflection. It was a room full of people who thought they'd come for a luxury weekend and had instead found themselves staring into a mirror they weren't ready to face. Captain Alvarez stepped forward again. "We owe this man our lives, not because he's famous, but because he acted when others didn't." There were no cheers, no dramatic tears, just something quieter and maybe more sacred. Heads bowed in shame, shoulders softened by humility, eyes finally open. And as the wind gentled and the yacht cut through soft waters again, a new current moved among the passengers, not of money, not of power, but of awareness, of what matters, and who truly leads when it counts. The sky had turned the soft gold of late afternoon, the worst of the storm was gone, and the celestial pearl cruised forward on calm waters once again. But there was still one storm left unresolved, one below deck, sealed behind a cabin door. Keanu stood in the hallway outside Sebastian's private suite. For the first time all weekend, he wasn't unsure of what he would say. He knew exactly why he was there. He knocked once. There was no answer. He knocked again, this time harder. Finally, a voice answered, hoarse, quiet. "Come in." Keanu opened the door. The suite was dark, blinds drawn tight. A half-empty glass of something amber-colored sat on a side table. The sleek furniture, once pristine, was now in mild disarray. Cushions thrown, papers scattered. Sebastian. No. The man pretending to be him sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, his suit jacket off, shirt wrinkled, collar unbuttoned. He didn't look up. Keanu stepped in and shut the door behind him. "I think it's time for the truth." Silence stretched for a moment. Then the man let out a long breath. "I thought maybe you'd just let it go." "I've let a lot of things go," Keanu said calmly. "But not this." The man slowly lifted his eyes. He didn't look like the host who had glided across the deck days ago. He looked older now. Broken in places, he could no longer hide. "My name isn't Sebastian," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's Michael. Michael Venn." Keanu didn't flinch. Michael continued, voice brittle. 7 years ago, I was building a company, renewable tech, something I thought could help people. I had big plans, a wife who believed in me, investors who trusted me. And then it all started slipping. He leaned back, eyes scanning the ceiling like he was replaying the collapse in his mind. The tech wasn't ready. I made promises I couldn't keep. The funding dried up. Then the media turned on me. The board forced me out. I lost everything. My wife, she left after 2 more years of watching me drown in bitterness. Keanu stood still, listening, unmoving. I needed someone to blame, Michael said, laughing bitterly. And you were everywhere. Keanu Reeves donates again. Keanu Reeves quietly funds cancer treatments. Keanu Reeves gives away millions to crew. You weren't just successful, you were good, and it made people like me look worse by comparison. Keanu didn't say a word. Michael's voice cracked. So I built this weekend, rented the yacht with borrowed money, convinced a few investors it was some networking experiment, paid for a few actors to help me play host. The rest, they just came because they wanted to be part of something exclusive. He rubbed his face, ashamed. I picked you because I knew you wouldn't say no to something worded right. I wrote the invitation myself. I told myself I wanted closure, but really, I wanted revenge. I wanted to watch the world's most beloved man squirm under pressure, be humiliated, get laughed at. I thought it would heal something inside me. Keanu's voice was quiet. Did it? Michael looked away. No. It made me feel worse. He stood now, arms limp at his sides. But when I saw you rewiring circuits while the others were hiding, when I saw you holding a cable with your bare hands while we veered off course, I hated how much I respected you. Michael's voice trembled now, raw in a way that felt like truth had been caged too long and had finally broken free. I sat here while it happened, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. Watched the monitors, watched you save the people who laughed at you, and it hit me like a brick. I was watching a man do the right thing, even after being torn down. I was watching someone I tried to destroy become the very thing I told myself he never was. Keanu's tone didn't change. It was gentle, but firm. You set a trap. You made me a target. But this, he looked around the ruined luxury suite. This isn't about me. It's about what you lost and what you haven't forgiven yourself for. Michael blinked. I haven't forgiven anyone. I can tell. They stood there in the quiet that only comes after a confession, a silence thick with consequence. Michael exhaled, slow and shaky. I've burned every bridge. I've become the thing I swore I never would be. A man who uses other people to feel powerful. Keanu crossed the room slowly. You're not beyond saving, Michael, but you have to stop punishing the world for your pain. Michael shook his head. Why would you even care? After what I did to you? Because I know what it's like to carry grief that turns into armor, Keanu said. I know what it's like to lose people, to feel like the world moved on without you. But revenge isn't healing. It's just another wound. Michael turned toward the window, pulling the blinds open slowly. Light spilled in across his face. I thought maybe if I could just prove the world's favorite man was flawed, it would mean I wasn't the only failure. Keanu stepped beside him. You're not a failure because your company collapsed. You're not a failure because someone else made it further than you. You only fail when you choose to let that pain harden you into someone cruel. Michael stared at the ocean, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to pretend. His hands were shaking, his voice stripped bare. I don't know how to come back from this. You don't have to do it alone. Michael turned, stunned. Keanu looked him in the eyes. Pain can bury you, or it can teach you. You chose the first path, but it's never too late to choose the second. Tears welled in Michael's eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. "Do you really believe that?" Keanu nodded. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." The cabin fell into a different kind of quiet now, one no longer shaped by shame, but by the fragile start of understanding. Michael sat down, exhausted. "I've lied to everyone on this yacht." Keanu nodded. "Then start telling the truth, one person at a time." Michael glanced around at the shattered illusion he'd built, then back at Keanu. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," Keanu said gently, "but you can still earn redemption." Michael didn't respond right away, but something shifted in his shoulders. And in the sunlight coming through the window, the man who had once orchestrated humiliation felt for the first time in years the possibility of becoming human again. Later that afternoon, Keanu stepped back onto the lower deck. Not as a guest, not as a survivor of humiliation, but as something more grounded, more certain. He found Rosa in the galley, restocking shells with quiet focus. Matteo was inspecting the stabilizer readings on a tablet, a streak of grease across his forearm. Elena sat cross-legged on the floor in the hallway, running diagnostics on a cracked communication relay. They looked up as Keanu approached, each of them pausing. "Hey," he said, voice soft but steady. "I need 10 minutes of your time, all of you." Without hesitation, they followed him into the small staff lounge beside the mechanical bay. It wasn't much, just a few chairs and a makeshift table, but it was quiet, and it was theirs. Keanu stood in front of them, hands in his pockets, the storm now only a memory. "I came here for something I thought was about vision," he began. "I ended up finding something better. Purpose." They listened, saying nothing, just watching the man who had earned their respect, not by status, but by presence. "I saw the truth of who you are this weekend, and I won't unsee it." Rosa furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" Keanu took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. On it were 3 words: The Haven Initiative. "I'm building something, a new project. One that doesn't care about resumes or degrees or boardrooms, one that starts with people like you." Matteo raised an eyebrow. "Like us?" "Yes. People who've been underestimated, overlooked, who still show up and give everything when the lights are off." He laid the paper on the table. "I want to fund it, back it, build it with you." Elena leaned in. "What is it, exactly?" "A platform," Keanu said. "A company, a mission. Call it whatever fits. But here's what it will do. Rosa, you'll lead a nutrition outreach program. Use your knowledge to help working families and hospital kitchens cook nourishing meals that restore dignity and health." Rosa's lips parted in disbelief. "Me?" "Yes, you." He turned to Matteo. "You're going to head a design team for energy-efficient transport systems, not for billionaires, for communities that can't afford Teslas, the kind of places that never make headlines." Matteo blinked. "That's what I've always wanted to do. Now you will." Then to Elena. "You'll lead the education tech division, that dream you shared, to build a global learning network for underserved students. That's going to happen." Elena looked as if someone had just handed her the moon. "You're serious? I've never been more?" They sat stunned, their silence full of emotion. Then Rosa said softly, "Why us?" "Because you saved me too," Keanu replied. "Not just from the storm, from forgetting what really matters." A knock at the door interrupted them. It opened slowly. Michael stood there. His face was open now, unguarded, no pretense. "I heard what's happening," he said. "I won't stay if you don't want me to, but I want to apologize. To all of you." They watched him. Rosa crossed her arms. "You built a lie around us?" "I did. And I'm sorry, truly." Matteo stayed quiet. Elena finally asked, "What do you want?" Michael looked at Keanu. "I want to help. Keanu looked at the 3 crew members, then back to Michael. "He's telling the truth," Keanu said. "And not long ago, he told me something that stuck with me. He said, 'I hated how much I respected you.' That kind of honesty doesn't come from a man still pretending." Michael nodded, ashamed but present. "I made this whole thing a stage for revenge. But somewhere along the way, watching you 3 work through the night, watching Keanu risk himself while I hid like a coward, something cracked open." Rosa stared at him, unsure. Mateo crossed his arms. "People like you don't usually change." Michael didn't flinch. "You're right, most don't. But I don't want to be most people anymore." Keanu stepped forward. "I'm offering him a role, not because he earned it, yet, but because the plan he built, though cruel, revealed something real. He found talent. He saw potential. And beneath the bitterness, there's someone who can help find more people like you." Elena glanced at Rosa, then Mateo. They said nothing, but something in their posture began to shift. "I'll start at the bottom," Michael offered quickly. "No titles, no control, I'll work wherever I'm needed." Rosa finally spoke. "One condition." Michael braced himself. "You sit with us. You eat with us. You listen before you speak." He nodded. "Done," Mateo added. "And no more fake names." Michael chuckled under his breath. "Deep." Keanu exhaled slowly, the moment settling. The lines had been redrawn, not between status and obscurity, but between those who stood for something and those who didn't. He returned to the paper he had placed on the table. At the bottom, under the Haven Initiative, he had written 4 simple bullet points. 1. Feed those who feed others. 2. Build what no one else will. 3. Teach what the world forgets. 4. Find the ones who were never given a chance. "This isn't charity," Keanu said. "It's a movement, a second chance machine. You're not employees, you're co-founders. You're the heart of this." Rosa blinked back tears. Mateo looked away, swallowing emotion. Elena let herself smile. Bright and free, like a door had finally opened. Keanu stepped back, giving them space to breathe it all in. Michael stood quietly, hands in his pockets, not speaking anymore, just watching. This time, he didn't look like a man grasping for control. He looked like someone grateful to have been let back in. Outside, the yacht neared the coast. The skyline of San Diego was just beginning to appear on the horizon. The storm was over, but something new was beginning. Keanu turned to them once more. "We land in an hour. When we step off that ship, the old story ends. What comes next? We build together." Rosa extended her hand first. Mateo placed his over hers. Elena followed. Then, slowly, Michael reached out too. And Keanu, calm, scarred, steady, placed his hand over all of theirs. The Haven Initiative had just begun. 6 months later, the world looked different. It began with a bright blue truck parked outside a school in East Los Angeles. On its side, in bold orange letters, it read, "The Haven Kitchen." Inside, Rosa stood over giant silver pots, stirring thick, warm lentil stew, while a line of children waited outside with paper bowls and laughter. Teachers waved from the doors. For many of the students, this was their first hot meal of the day, for some, their only. Each bowl came with a note, cooked with love, served with respect. Rosa had created a fleet, 5 trucks, each with a mobile kitchen and a small team of trained chefs. They visited underfunded schools, low-income neighborhoods, even hospitals short on staff. Her recipes, honed over decades, were now serving thousands. But more than the food, it was the presence, dignified, consistent, human, that changed the atmosphere. One school principal later said, "She didn't just feed our kids, she reminded us they were worth feeding." Across the country, Mateo's workshop had taken over an abandoned steel warehouse outside Albuquerque. With Keanu's funding and Haven's backing, Mateo and his team were designing something deceptively simple: a modular bicycle built with ultra-durable parts and attachable solar-powered motors. It could be used for commuting, hauling goods, or even generating electricity in emergencies. The bikes were cheap to build, easy to repair, and shipped globally. In a small farming village in southern Georgia, a group of elderly workers used them to reach produce fields miles away without losing hours to foot travel. In rural Nevada, a school bus driver, who'd lost her route during budget cuts, used one to deliver books to kids in her community. Mateo received dozens of letters every week, written on napkins, school paper, even carved into wood by a man in Idaho who could. "You saved my back and my dignity," one read. Mateo kept them all pinned to a massive corkboard in his workshop, right next to the photograph of the celestial pearl. Elena, meanwhile, had gone global. Using her original blueprint and support from Haven, she launched Bridgepoint, a digital learning network that combined low-bandwidth video classrooms, downloadable lesson kits, and volunteer teachers from 6 continents. It started as an experiment in her living room. Within months, it connected over 40,000 students across rural parts of Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and even underserved parts of the United States. In northern Uganda, a young girl named Miriam used Bridgepoint's science lessons to pass her national exam, the first in her family to do so. In a village in Laos, an 8-year-old boy logged in each evening on a tablet that was charged by solar panels installed by Haven volunteers. He used the reading modules to help his grandmother learn to write her name. "I didn't think this kind of change was possible," Elena admitted during an interview on NPR. "I just kept writing code, hoping someone would notice." Now the world was not only noticing, it was cheering. And then there was Michael. He didn't lead a flashy program or make headlines. But in a modest office tucked inside Haven's headquarters, he ran weekly sessions for entrepreneurs who had failed and fallen apart, just like he once did. They came in angry, ashamed, hollow. Michael didn't try to fix them. He just told the truth. In each of his sessions, Michael started with the same words: "I built a lie so big it nearly broke me. Then someone I tried to ruin gave me a second chance." He never mentioned Keanu by name. He didn't need to. The story traveled on its own. One man who had filed for bankruptcy after his restaurant failed told Michael, "You made me believe again, not in business, in people." Another, a woman who had been publicly fired from her tech startup, sent a note that simply read, "You gave me the courage to start again, with less fear and more truth." Michael didn't smile often, but when he did, it was real now, earned. And behind his desk hung a framed photo, not of him, not of Keanu, but of a crowded hallway on the Celestial Pearl, 3 figures standing shoulder to shoulder: Rosa, Mateo, Elena. Below it, a brass plate read, "Where the World First Changed." The Yacht story, once whispered among elite circles, eventually reached the surface. Someone leaked it, anonymously. No names, just the events. A luxury cruise, a cruel game, a storm, a man who rose above it all, the guests who laughed, the crew who stood up. But the effect was unexpected. Former passengers from the trip, those who had once turned away, whispered insults, stayed silent, began to reach out. Not with excuses, with support. One guest donated 100 laptops to Bridgepoint, requesting anonymity. Another sponsored the Haven Kitchen's expansion into Detroit. The tech CEO who once called Keanu a mountain man sent a letter to Haven's office. It was handwritten, uneven, almost trembling. The final line read, "You made me believe again. In decency, in humility, in people. Thank you." Keanu read that one quietly at his desk, folded it, and tucked it into a box marked, "Why We Started." As Haven grew, Keanu remained its soul, not as a boss, not as a celebrity mascot, but as a servant. He showed up for kitchen truck launches in jeans and sneakers. He visited Mateo's shop and tested bikes himself, always waving to kids who didn't recognize him for his films, but knew him as the guy who helped Uncle build that cool ride. He watched Elena's first virtual graduation ceremony from the back of the room, clapping as a 14-year-old girl from Bolivia gave a speech in English she had learned using Bridgepoint's app. And he attended one of Michael's workshops, sitting silently in a folding chair among a dozen men and women who were finally starting to forgive themselves. One night, after a long day, Rosa found him cleaning tables after a Haven fundraiser. "You don't have to do this," she said. Keanu looked up, smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I get to." She sat beside him and added, "You know this all started because someone wanted to tear you down." "I know," Keanu said softly. "But maybe sometimes that's what it takes to build something better." Outside, a mural had just been finished on the side of Haven's headquarters. It showed a storm-tossed ship, a quiet man in flannel holding out a hand, and 3 crew members rising beside him. Not behind, not below, but beside. And beneath the image, 4 words were painted in white: dignity, purpose, forgiveness, hope. The dock shimmered in the golden light of late morning as the celestial pearl came into view. But the yacht looked nothing like it had 1 year earlier. Gone were the velvet ropes and champagne banners. In their place stood hand-painted signs that read, "Innovation lives here," and "The Haven Tour. Welcome students." Bright laughter echoed across the gangplank as children stepped aboard. Kids from local shelters, public schools, and remote townships, now given a day to dream. Each wore a name badge and held a small notepad, eager to scribble down anything they might learn. Keanu stood at the edge of the dock, hands in his pockets, quietly watching the children flood the ship that had once been the site of his public humiliation. He wore the same kind of flannel he had worn that weekend. Faded, comfortable, and unapologetically his. But the air was different now. Inside the yacht's repurposed ballroom, Rosa gave a tour of the mobile kitchen model, now used in 12 cities worldwide. She passed out samples of her famous banana bread while explaining to kids how balanced meals could change attention spans, confidence, and entire communities. In the former cocktail lounge, Mateo stood over a modular bike display. He let children spin the wheels and test a tiny solar generator that powered a laptop. "This could be your commute one day," he told a 12-year-old boy from East Oakland. "Or your delivery job, or the first invention you improve." And on the top deck, where the mock trial had once been staged, Elena ran a live virtual call with a rural classroom in India. As the children on the yacht watched, a smiling teacher halfway around the world greeted them in 3 languages. "Technology is just a bridge," Elena said. "You decide where it leads." Keanu eventually stepped aboard and made his way to the bridge of the ship. Michael was already there, looking out over the water with quiet pride. He had aged in a different way. Less weight, more gravity. "You made it," he said without turning. Keanu stepped beside him. "Wouldn't have missed it." Michael nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and handed Keanu a folded note. "Someone asked me to give this to you." Keanu opened it slowly. The handwriting was shaky but careful. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for helping my daughter Rosa believe her gifts mattered. She believed in feeding people, and because of you, she now feeds nations. You didn't just save her, you saved me. My treatments worked. I'm still here. And I wake up every morning proud that kindness beat cancer. Twice." "You saved more than one life that night." Antonio Martinez. Keanu folded the note and held it gently in his palm. Outside, a young girl tapped a screen on one of Elena's learning modules. A boy nearby shouted with glee as he pedaled one of Mateo's bikes and lit up a bulb connected to a small turbine. None of them knew what this place had once been. None of them knew how close it had come to being just another forgotten vessel. But Keanu knew. He looked out over the deck, over the faces filled with hope. And he whispered, quietly, almost to himself, "The storm didn't break me. It cleared the sky." That afternoon, Haven hosted a small ceremony on the main deck. Not for awards, not for donors, not for press. Just a closing circle of the children, the mentors, and the crew who had lived the story firsthand. A chalkboard stood near the bow of the ship. At the top, in sweeping white script, it read, "What do you want to build?" One by one, the kids picked up colored chalk and scribbled their dreams. A clinic for animals. A school where no one gets bullied. A robot that helps Grandma walk again. Keanu read each one with care. There were no cameras, no media teams, just joy, scribbled in the language of hope. He glanced to his right and saw Rosa crouched beside a girl who wanted to be a chef. Mateo was laughing with two boys who had turned his toolkit into a treasure hunt. Elena sat quietly with a shy student who asked, "Do people like me ever get to invent things?" "You already are," Elena told her. Michael stood in the background, clipboard in hand, no longer commanding but supporting. Everything had changed. The guests who once judged him were long gone. Some had sent letters, others quiet donations. A few had written anonymous essays online about the actor who reminded us how to listen. But that wasn't the legacy that mattered. This was the hum of children learning, the silent pride of lives reclaimed, the sound of good work in motion. Keanu stepped toward the helm, where a group of kids had gathered to watch the captain steer. They asked 100 questions. The captain answered every one. Then one child turned to Keanu and asked, "Were you ever scared?" He paused. "Yes," he said, "many times." The child nodded. "But you didn't run." "No," Keanu replied, "because the people who matter most were already standing beside me." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the horizon, painting the ocean in orange and purple, Keanu sat at the back of the ship with a notebook in hand. He didn't write anything. He just sat, quietly grateful, quietly changed. 1 year ago, this vessel had tried to break him. Now it carried the weight of something far more powerful than prestige. It carried purpose. And it wasn't his alone. It belonged to every child who stepped on board and dared to imagine. Every teacher who shared their wisdom. Every person who had ever been dismissed and then discovered. The Haven Initiative had no shareholders, no red carpets, no launch parties. Just people, believing in people. Before stepping off the ship that night, Keanu tucked Antonio's note into the helm's logbook. Then he looked out over the quiet water one last time and smiled. Some storms come to destroy. Others come to reveal the sky that was waiting behind the clouds. And sometimes, the most broken place becomes the best place to begin. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Tell us in the comments. We read every story. And if you believe in second chances, in kindness, in building something new, hit that subscribe button. Because like the children on the Haven deck, we believe that every life still holds untold potential. And sometimes, the biggest change begins with just one person choosing to care.